Let's go. Okay. Good evening. A heartfelt welcome to each and every one of you. First and foremost, I would like to express my gratitude to everyone for dedicating your time to this event, centered around the engaging and thought-provoking topic, opportunity over urgency. We need a new narrative for climate action. I hope it sparks dialogue and in due course inspire positive action from all of you. I'm Nathalie Reynaud, and since 1998 I've worked globally in research, academia, private and public sector, collaborating with international organizations as a facilitator and a coach. Committed to sustainable solutions, I foster exchanges between sectors to address challenges like climate change, health, gender equality, and sustainable development. I'm part of WOMENVAI community, and I believe in mobilizing everyone's strength for a better world. And today, I'm honored to serve as your Master of Ceremony for this session. Allow me to introduce our esteemed panel. Yvette Ramos, President of WOMENVAI, will remotely introduce the event through a video presentation. WOMENVAI focuses on advocating for girls and women globally, engaging in projects with artificial intelligence and new technologies alongside male colleagues in STEAM, which stands for Science, Technology, Engineering, and Math. With 25 years of experience, Yvette has worked in the private and the public sector, with a focus on modernizing climate services and bringing expertise to social and economic sectors in the least developed countries. She serves as an international expert at the United Nations agencies, International Telecom Union, and WMO, World Meteorological Organization. Following the video presentation, Remy Kalter, the director of the public affairs at Solar Impulse Foundation, will introduce a new climate narrative, a strategy to overcome resistance to climate action. The foundation is committed to identify financially viable and environmentally sustainable clean technologies, accelerating their adoption by working on creating the right enabling environment. This includes demonstrating that the dominant narrative of climate action no longer reflects the reality of what is possible. Dr. Zahra Khan, our next panelist, will discuss opportunities for a new narrative. With a PhD in chemistry from UCL, London, and A-Star, Singapore, Dr. Khan is part of the GRIP network, promoting gender-responsive policies and equality by bridging social and physical sciences. She actively contributes globally and teaches at the university level. A dedicated member of WOMENVAI, Dr. Khan also works as a science writer, advocating for diverse voices in STEAM-related news, policy, and opinions. This leads us to our youth panel about youth perspectives on climate justice. We have Ella Bedford and Miriam Zallocco, second-year UCL, University College London students who have won a challenge by GRIP and WOMENVAI on their climate project. This will be followed by a question and answer session where you will have the opportunity to hear from our youth experts. Clara, with a decade of experience as a sustainable advocate, Clara has been actively involved in grassroots and international level across arts, politics, and youth initiatives. She co-founded the Solar Radiation Modification Youth Watch and is a supporter of the World's Youth for Climate Justice campaign. Clara sought an advisory opinion on the climate crisis from the International Court of Justice, served as a science policy thematic facilitator for UNEP, and hold the role of new European voice on existential risk. And Charlie Bevis, a trainee solicitor at Norton Rose Fulbright, is actively engaged in the domains of energy, climate, law, and policy. He is also a prominent figure at the G20 Youth UK head delegate at COP28, delegate at the G20 Youth, and a climate delegate representing the Climate Youth Negotiator program at COP28. We will conclude our side event with closing remark from Remy Kalter and Dr. Zahra Khan, opening the floor for a discussion where you can pose questions to our panelists. Without more delays, let's proceed to the video presentation by Yvette Ramos.
Excellencies, colleagues, friends from around the world, good evening and thank you to be with us. I'm Yvette Ramos, co-founder and president of WOMENVAI. Welcome everyone to this side event being held tonight, 6th December in Dubai, at the occasion of the 28th Conference of Parties of the United Nations Framework of Convention for Climate Change. Opportunity over urgency. Why we need a new narrative for climate action. This is our topic for tonight, and we are proud to gather wonderful panelists to discuss the key issues. Sometimes not visible, nor known, nor understood topics, or sometimes not even highlighted, not reflected in the official programs, side events, resolutions, agreements. All of these topics include maybe controversial topics such as SRM, geoengineering, or critical materials exploration impacts on health or biodiversity, or even gender-based violence in climate-related conflicts, or even climate and finance regulation and global governance, etc., etc. Taking off the invisibility cloak on these hot topics are too important not to be discussed with youth and you all, hoping we can all combine efforts to try and work on a new narrative and new concrete implementation of solutions with technology, with humans, women and men, with our dearest planet. And of course, with the effects of climate change that may be reversed or not reversed for the future. Starting now, actually, the future is not 2030 or 2050 or 2100. It's right now, starting up with maybe our pledge that we'll do and sign together at the end of this session. Before giving the floor to our panelists, let me present you briefly our young NGO, WOMENVAI, 6 years old very soon and already granted with a special consultative status, ECOSOC, to the United Nations, with UNFCCC accreditation since 3 years. We are a very unique platform gathering women and men together in STEM, science, technology, engineering, and math, to build and bring sustainable solutions for a better world, aligned with the SDGs, Sustainable Development Goals. Our WOMENVAI goals, among others, are to represent the interests of women in STEM globally, strengthen their role in our society in a sustainable and inclusive way, and create innovative synergies, particularly in areas with high technological added value, to benefit sustainable development and environmental issues. That is why we are here and try to be with our wonderful WOMENVAI delegation of nearly 50 people these 2 weeks from 20 countries, 65% women, 40% youth, and be an actor of change, an actor of humanity change. Thanks and have a wonderful side event.
Thank you. So let's hear now from Remy Kalter about the need for a new climate narrative to highlight the opportunities of the ecological transition.
Thank you, Nathalie. Thank you, Yvette, and thank you all for being here this evening. Yeah, so let me give you a little bit of a history which gives some greater context to what I'm going to be presenting. I'm from the Solar Impulse Foundation, which it might be known to you due to the solar-powered flight around the world in 2016 and 2017. The objective of that flight was to prove that the technologies, the so-called clean tech, are much more advanced than people think and can be used to do quite extraordinary things. Following the completion of that tour around the world, we as an organization set out to find 1,000 solutions across very, very many different sectors. So Solar Impulse is the name, but we go well beyond renewable energies, we go well beyond solar. We touch on everything that you can see in the top left there, energy, water, waste pollution, mobility, etc. The objective being to say many of the technologies that exist are already with us, they just have not been brought to scale. They're mature enough, they can protect the environment, they're significantly better than the mainstream alternatives, and critically, they are financially viable to use. There's a business interest in making use of them, and there's also an interest in consumers themselves making use of them. That took us about 4 years to find those 1,000 solutions, and they ultimately serve as a burden of evidence to say that these technologies do exist. I think there's an interesting quote from John Kerry from a couple of years ago saying that to deal with, we have yet to develop the technologies to deal with 50% of the emissions that we currently emit. And the question that we often ask ourselves is, yes, but what about all the technologies that already exist? Why are we already not using them at the scale they require? And one of the key questions there is the enabling environment in which they exist. And if we don't have the proper enabling environment, then we can continue to innovate to our heart's content, but we will we'll still continue to not adopt those technologies at the rate at which we need to in order to reduce our environmental footprint to the extent that we need to. And so that's why we really want to focus on that enabling environment. We've also worked with these technologies to identify what are the obstacles that they see in terms of their uptake, and we've worked on certain legal and regulatory and fiscal aspects. But I think what's critical to know is, of course, one of the enabling environment is also informed by the political. And the political is so clearly linked to the stories that you're telling and the stories that you're going to be telling your electorate. And so that's why we decided to focus on creating a new climate narrative, one that is very much focused on the opportunities of the ecological transition and how we might go about unlocking them. Now, as the title of this panel and this event indicates, it's urgency over opportunity. It's not really a question of pitting one against the other. It's more so the notion of recognizing that the science is as complicated as it may be, remains very clear. And that urgency message is certainly having a certain amount of impact, but we also know that we're not moving more quickly enough. And so what we wanted to do here with this piece of work that Solar Impulse Foundation has worked on is to give to the policy leaders that attend the COP the tools so that when they go back home, they're able to engage with their citizenry in a manner that speaks to those specific groups and their concerns with regard to the ecological transition. The urgency remains, there's no disputing that obviously, but we want to bring the message closer to people so that they themselves can recognize what, for want of a better phrase, what's in it for them as well. And I think this is a really key point, because what we find is that the narrative around climate action has not been updated to reflect the new advancements in the technologies, which are also becoming apparent through the financial argument for actually using those technologies. So what we have, here's just a little quote from the chairman of our foundation in indicating the absolute need for this shift in narrative, and when they're calling for no less than a revolution in the way we speak about climate action. I wanted to show you this. This is the report itself, which is up here for all of those who want to read it when they have time after the COP is finished. We have 21 separate messages. They're not exhaustive. They're a start. They target certain groups, certain business groups or communities that are going to be particularly hit, for example, by a move away from fossil fuels. And these folks that we need to make sure we're targeting effectively. And but by targeting, I mean describing to them the opportunities that exist for them through the transition. It's not just about your livelihoods disappearing. What's very clear is that all these narratives need to be coupled with the right kind of policy, or else it does become some form of greenwashing, some notion of just, yes, it'll be fine, you'll work your way through it. And that's also within our report, is the recognition of certain policies that would be suitable for those, for those different communities. You'll be happy to hear I won't be going through all 21. I just want to touch on a couple of them for now. And some of it may seem, kind of simplistic. It's like, okay, you want to change this word with this word, but I think what's really important is recognizing that there's a mindset shift that needs to be happen, and that we need, and it's not just talking about optimism in an optimistic way for optimism's sake. It's really to recognize that this reflects the reality of the situation in terms of what can be achieved. So this first point, framing decarbonization as a consequence of modernization. This is based on the idea, especially this targets a business audience, whereby, and consumers to an extent, whereby that we see inherent inefficiencies in the products we buy, the processes we use to our means of production ultimately. And we need to, throughout this entire piece of work, the notion of efficiency is very clear throughout the whole, what's the word? I've forgotten the word. The whole product, sorry. And that notion of making the most of what we have available to us. There are arguments to talk about reducing our footprint in terms of degrowth and things like that, which have their own value as an approach, but there are real questions about whether a sort of degrowth mindset is one that, or approach is one that we have time to actually implement. I think it's really interesting, for example, that Noam Chomsky, who of course we know as being very, very left-wing, says it's too late to actually have an alternative model to capitalism to deal with the climate crisis. So we have to also deal within the power structures that exist at the moment. And so when we're talking about modernization, this is because there's such an opportunity to make, to be made from modernizing our infrastructure, modernizing our processes, and if we sell it as decarbonization, we're almost saying to people, the reason you're doing it is for decarbonization's sake. Whereas actually what we're trying to say to you is you can make massive savings by actually modernizing your infrastructure. We know, for example, in Europe that the built environment is extremely inefficient. 40% of the emissions of the continent come from the built environment. And we know that over half of the buildings themselves are low efficiency and leaking heat in every corner possible, and that the renovation rate is only about 1%. What we need to put in place is a means by which we say, by actually making these buildings far more energy efficient, you will ultimately save money, and we can and because you can actually pay for the investments in those refurbishments by the savings that you can make, it becomes there's a much stronger economic argument to do so. And so I've only touched on little bits and pieces of the overall argument in that case, but it's this notion of saying by modernization you actually drive economic activity and improve the quality of life for people. And actually it won't cost you anything in the long run, it's just perhaps we need to extend our horizons a little further. Point 15. Protecting the present generation, not just the future one. I touched on this a little moment ago, about these communities who are very concerned about their livelihoods disappearing as we push for renewable energy uptake and moving away from fossil fuels. Obviously, nobody disputes that, the need to do that and the urgency to do that, but we obviously need to make sure it's done in a thought-through process. That clearly means that we need to invest massive, and this is probably the most heavily policy-oriented point in here. We have to invest massively in the upskilling and the reskilling of individual community groups to make sure that there's an opportunity for them. We need to do it now. We need to do it in the coming years, and not make the argument, but you're doing this for your children, because while that is true, it's not going to help them pay the bills at the end of the day. Well, that's obvious to everybody here. But it does mean that we need to consider certain other measures. If these communities cannot be adapted to the evolving economic situation, we do need to consider programs that allow them to continue having a livelihood so that the economy around it doesn't collapse over time. Those are all critical elements to make sure that you're targeting your policies and your message to people's lives right now, not just making the argument they need to think about it for the future. And just this last point very quickly, and it kind of comes to the core of the overall message of our foundation and the work here, is it a question of climate urgency or economic imperative? And I think we've seen this quite strongly with the actions taken in Europe, in the United States, also in China, but more broadly around the world, is this notion of the competitive opportunity that has presented itself from the ecological transition. We've even seen this rise in so-called protectionism, if we wish, because a lot of these policies have started recognizing that there's an advantage to be gained from investing in the transition itself. And I think that's a really cool message to say. If you want to grow your economy, or at least increase economic activity within your country, you are in a competitive environment. You need to recognize that we're not just doing it for the environment's sake. It's because if you modernize, your country will be far ahead in the next step of those competing countries who are not actually doing it themselves. And I think that's where it's important that the political actors are able to convince their electorates that these are opportunities for them, and that's why they should not be punished if they take a pro-climate approach, because it's very much based on improving people's quality of life.
I think we need to wrap up. Thank you for sharing your expertise, and thank you for your insightful presentation. That was very, very interesting. Transitioning to our upcoming presentation, Zahra will be sharing insight into her collaboration with GRIP in partnership with WOMENVAI. Following her presentation, she will have Ella and Miriam, students at UCL, sharing the innovative aspects of the new narrative they've been working on.
Okay, great. Okay, hi everyone, I'm Zahra. Thank you, Nathalie. That was great, and thank you, Remy. So I am here as part of GRIP, which stands for Gender Responsive Resilience and Intersectionality in Policy and Practice. It's a 4-year global collaboration project funded by the UKRI. It aims to foster an international collaboration that brings to the forefront initiatives from the global south. And it does this by having an intersectional and decolonial approach. And it wants to implement better policies and practices in the field of gender-responsive disaster risk reduction, climate change action, and development. So before I go into anything else, I just want to touch on some key terminology and definitions. So these definitions that I have up on the screen are all from the UN website. So gender is, as I'm sure most of you are aware of, socially constructed, but the UN definition only talks about the binary, which is women and men. So here at GRIP, and I'm sure most of you agree that it's beyond the binary, and this is internationally. So we have multiple genders. So a more substantive definition is from the Yogyakarta Principles, which, I mean, you could read it there, but it's each person's deeply felt internal and individual expression of gender, which may or may not correspond with the sex assigned at birth. And this includes personal sense of the body, modification of bodily appearance, and other expressions of gender. So that's just something that I wanted to highlight. Then we have intersectionality. So intersectionality is a term used to describe the idea that social relations involve multiple intersecting forms of discrimination. So this is from the UNDP. So, for example, I am a woman, but I'm a woman of color, but I'm also an educated woman. So it's about highlighting those characteristics and knowing that not only do they form several forms of discrimination, but they can also give you privileges as well. So it's always important to have an intersectional approach when you discuss things. Just some more definitions. I'll be really quick with these. Social justice, which is based on the values of fairness, equality, respect of diversity, access to social protection. Disaster risk reduction, just because it comes hand in hand with climate change, and is aimed at preventing new and reducing existing disaster risk and managing these risks, which contribute to strengthening resilience. Resilience then follows this on. It is the ability of a system, community, or society exposed to hazards to resist and accommodate and recover from these effects of these hazards. And that's through the preservation and restoration of essential basic structures. And then just to touch lightly on vulnerability, these are the conditions determined by physical, social, economic, and environmental factors, which increase the susceptibility of an individual or a community to the impacts of hazards. So these are just some terms that you might hear in my presentation, just so you know what we're talking about. So leading on from what Remy said and touching on some of the new narratives that he mentioned, but not the ones that he highlighted, just so you know that there is a link between what we're talking about. There was one of the ones was making the transition as an advantage to all from the north to the south, and at GRIP and WOMENVAI, that's what we want. We want to make sure that sustainable development is sustainable for everyone, not just the global north. It's also about talking, not about future technologies, but existing ones. So using what we already have on this planet, using nature-based solutions, it doesn't have to be high-tech. And also speaking of solutions and not just problems. So the narrative that we want to come in with is bridging the gap between the social and physical sciences, promoting collaboration, education, and encouraging youth voices, and also mainstreaming gender into everything that we do. I'm sure most of you are aware that disasters and therefore climate change and impacts are not gender neutral. This has been stated, it's a fact, so we cannot neglect this issue when we discuss technical solutions. So I'll just go on to give a little example. So this is Kevin, he works with me and at GRIP, and he's part of the No Natural Disaster campaign. So are disasters natural? Well, they're not, but a lot of physical scientists might say that they still are. Social scientists will say that they're not. And it's going back to Remy's point about the language and why that matters, because disasters are not natural, but if we have people who claim that they are, we're not going to get proper solutions. So just a little statement from Kevin. The No Natural Disasters campaign highlights the idea that while natural hazards are inevitable, disasters are not, and they are often the result of social and economic factors. So this perspective underscores the importance of the interplay between physical and social sciences in addressing the impact of hazards on communities and societies as a whole. So within the realm of climate change, this premise remains largely unchanged. So we have the physical process of our changing climate, but this cannot be discussed without understanding societal inputs and outputs. So at present, the narrative around the climate crisis is largely split into two distinct areas: the focus on how and why the climate is changing, and then an almost separate discussion on who is getting affected and how it's impacting society. So there is not enough in the way of work that argues and explores the links between these two focus areas. So following in the part of the No Natural Disaster campaign, we need to understand the interconnectedness of these discussions and realizing that there is no way to unpick the discussions from each other. This is even more evident when considering the roles of vulnerabilities and exposures created by climate change, specifically on those marginalized and hyper-marginalized communities. So going back to gender and the gender minorities that are often excluded in these discussions. So just to give you some examples, we have meteorology, which is often considered physical science, and then we have public policy, which is often in the social realm. But the meteorological studies provide the critical data on climate patterns and predictions, and these formulate the public policies. So we need to integrate public policy to ensure that scientific knowledge is translated into actionable strategies that are socially relevant, economically viable, and politically feasible. So from an inclusive or gender perspective, the impact of weather on women, girls, and other marginalized groups is an area that is growing, but it needs more focus. Then going on to agricultural science, which is more for physical science, and food security, which is social. Climate change will affect agricultural productivity. Understanding these impacts through agricultural science is vital, but linking it with a social science perspective on food security and distribution, once again with a strong focus on gender and hyper-marginalized groups, helps in creating strategies that ensure a stable food supply while also considering socio-economic disparities. And then lastly, but certainly not least, health sciences and community resilience. So the health sciences, and we know that we had a health day at this year's COP. Health and climate change is very intrinsically linked, play a critical role in understanding the direct and indirect health impacts of climate change. So if you integrate this knowledge with social science and the research community, including psychological and social coping mechanisms, you can develop more comprehensive health plans and strategies in the face of climate change. So within the field of health science, you can see that this has become a bit more well-known, and the research is there, but there is still huge gaps which exist in the more intersectional approaches. So overall, the collaboration between physical and social sciences is vital for a holistic understanding of climate change and for devising strategies that are both scientifically sound and socially equitable. This interdisciplinary approach is one that has largely been recognized within the hashtag No Natural Disasters campaign, which emphasizes the need for comprehensive solutions to mitigate the societal impacts of disasters. So that's from Kevin, and he's a gender and disaster risk reduction specialist. So definitely do contact him if you want more information on that. So going on to some of the work that we do at GRIP. So we have collaborative partners from all over the globe. We have Africa, South Asia, and the Latin Caribbean. If you do go on our website, we have all our fact sheets there for you to look at. But I'm just going to highlight some success stories within GRIP. So GRIP Asia has had great success in their curriculum work, showing that education is really important when they include disaster risk reduction in their curriculum, and that also intrinsically links to resilience and climate change. And they have also shown that budgetary allocation, so as we know, climate financing is really important. They have shown that if you have a gender budget across all the ministries, you can provide better solutions. Going on to GRIP Africa, and actually we have one of our GRIP Africa members here, Maria. Yes, so if you want to know more, definitely, she's a wonderful woman. She's part of the Gender Climate Change Tanzanian Coalition, which raises awareness on the impact of gender and climate change. They do this through advocacy, training, education, meetings with stakeholders, and they go from the top prime ministerial level to the local frontline communities. And they translate local documents into their local languages to make sure that people on the ground know what's happening. Another success story is Echoes of Humanity. So here we have a picture of one of our trained women drivers. So here they are working towards economic empowerment and achieving better social outcomes. So they have built a solar power station that can power a minimum of 5 solar electric trikes to promote a women-based transport solution. So this goes a long way in enhancing ease of access to agricultural markets for women, so they could earn their income and provide for their families. Community members who have been trained have gained knowledge and skills relating to solar-powered electric systems. So these contribute to making them more resilient and have open opportunities for them to be independent in their financial earnings. So through that, we've had 20 women trained in driving skills, 4 have received their provisional, 1 has received a full license, 20 have been trained as bookkeeping, we've got 1 solar station installed. So this shows how relatively, existing technology is really helping empower the women out there in Zimbabwe. Okay, I'm just going to now move on to some of the stuff that we do at UCL. And I just want to quickly point out, yes, through GRIP, we partnered up with WOMENVAI, which we're very, very happy with. They have come to UCL to provide the students skills and knowledge. We have very similar goals. And so it's been a very mutually beneficial partnership between GRIP and WOMENVAI. This partnership has allowed the students to be here today, so it just highlights why collaboration is key to ensure that we all gain from these positive collaborations. We put on events at UCL for this interdisciplinary approach. So from people who work in the physical science faculty to the social sciences, so they could come together and really provide a solution. And these have been really successful. We have students who come in and they get into teams of different backgrounds, different disciplines, and they can come up with a climate solution in like 30 minutes. And these are feasible, actionable, and relevant solutions. So we really appreciate the fact that these partnerships are strong and they work, and giving the voice to the youth empowers them to actually make change. So without further ado, I will hand it over to Ella and Miriam, who will tell you a bit about their project and give you an idea of why collaborating between the disciplines is what the narrative we are pushing for. Thank you.
Hi, I'm Ella. I'm a second year student at UCL studying theoretical physics.
Oh, okay, right. So my name is Miriam, and I'm a second year student at UCL as well, and I'm studying global humanitarian studies. And so we are here just because we won the GRIP STEM Challenge this summer, and that was brought by UCL GRIP in collaboration with WOMENVAI, and we're extremely grateful for this.
So we were challenged with coming up with a project that combats a climate-related issue with a gender focus within the and something that we could sort of feasibly implement.
Quickly talking about the project outline. So we decided to tackle this issue around climate crisis in a very easy and tangible way, and in a way that we can make the most impact, which is our universities, because we spend most of our days there, unfortunately. But our project centers on having an interdisciplinary approach and really embedding that into universities, into science, STEM, more related degrees, and especially in this case. And also, the main bulk of the project is really implementing compulsory modules, which or modules that you can select, which cover the discussion about ethical and sustainability within science research. And the project scope the project just aims to help students to develop the understanding that they need to be able to develop these technologies which can be used in the future for combating climate change by having somewhat of a social and more systemic approach to it. And in this specific case, we looked at the Faculty of Physics and Maths, so both of us are in that faculty, and we just hope to provide a framework that is easy and adaptable, that can be transferred to different universities and different faculties and different degrees.
So to highlight the importance of collaboration between the physical and social sciences for the development and implementation of new and existing technologies, we looked at a specific case study, one of many we could have chosen, which is lithium mining on the Atacama salt flats in Chile. So I'll just start off with a basis on the process of lithium mining. So there are three main methods for commercial lithium mining, and the mining used in Chile is an extraction of brine. So they set up a pumping system and they extract brine from beneath the salt flats. The brine undergoes a series of chemical treatments. It's, as you can see in the photo, lots of different ponds are set up on top of the salt flats, and the brine is pumped through each of them, undergoing different chemical treatments, as I said, and being evaporated in each pond. This whole process takes between 12 and 18 months, and as you'll see, it's not a very sustainable process. So what do we need lithium for? The big thing is lithium-ion batteries. So a lot of the technology that we use today, including your laptops and your phones, all use lithium-ion batteries. Solar panels also store their energy in lithium-ion batteries. And then the big thing at the moment, one of the big things at the moment, I guess, is electric vehicles, and they also use lithium-ion batteries. So what are the problems with lithium mining? There are many. To start off with, the salt flats have been the home of many indigenous communities for a very long time. Historically, it's their territory, but now given the increased demand for lithium and its profitability, their right to this land has been disregarded, and and now there's lots of mines. But yeah, one of the biggest issues concerns water. So during the process of mining, they have to give data on their carbon emissions, their energy consumption, and also their water usage. But because what these companies are sort of pulling out from the ground is brine, they choose to not consider that as sort of using water, and say that they have their water footprint is very low. However, there are many studies as well as on-the-ground impacts that show that the extraction of brine has a tangible impact on freshwater aquifers, which are obviously providing for the indigenous communities, as well as sort of the biodiversity on these salt flats. So, with these companies drilling up this, pulling up this brine, and losing about 80% of the original uptake during the evaporation process, these indigenous communities are left with little to no water, and as well as the water that they do have being sort of chemically contaminated due to the treatments that go on in these ponds. So I think this sort of highlights how there's such a divide between the global north and the global south. What we consider as what is considered as a new sustainable solution in the global north, so electric vehicles, is actually, has an awful effect on some of these communities in the global south. And is it really sustainable then if it's threatening the livelihood of these communities?
And yeah, something to highlight is that the impacts are not equal for everyone. So and because we'll be looking at gender as well, especially in this because of GRIP and all the work that we've done, we can see that women are affected completely differently from men. So because women have different needs, due to the labor market and the family structure in these countries, women tend to be at more contact with these resources. So they are at a higher risk of having contact with these contaminated waters, which is obviously bad for health. Also, something to highlight is that the water scarcity issue and the contamination of water is impacting agriculture, which is a main industry in these populations, especially for indigenous people, and the majority of the people working in agriculture in Chile are women. So this can result even in more job loss and family structure. So women play a big part in family, and a lot of the workers in these lithium mining plants are working at it's not very humane conditions, not just in Chile, but all over the globe, meaning that then the woman has to deal with family issues as well. But there are many other examples all over the world, like the ones highlighted on the slide. So we come up with this solution where we basically looking at collaboration between physical and social sciences within the education system. So our plan was to introduce compulsory modules that talk about sustainability and the social issues surrounding the creation and innovation of new technologies. And it encourages interdisciplinary study and research, and also fosters interest in finding these solutions for climate change, looking at a more system, more interdisciplinary, from a more interdisciplinary lens. So our project aids the research of these solutions that can be used to help climate change by aiming to target sustainability issues from a research point of view, so starting directly from the get-go. So instead of developing the new technology, like, oh yeah, this is super cool, and then realizing, oh, sugar, the impacts are really not that interesting, just starting from straight up to the point. So being aware of the negative impacts straight away from the research point of view. So you're tackling that issue from the start, not having to then get everything sorted and then, find yourself with a different issue. But also empowering young people, as we are greatly affected by this topic and by this issue. And yeah, just bridging the collaboration gap that Zahra was talking about, more collaboration between people from different disciplines and different research backgrounds. So, and how are we gonna implement this project? So first of all, we need to develop a suitable sustainability module. So this will be with help of sustainability experts from all different countries and all different backgrounds. And then approach program leads. So we were gonna start off with UCL, and we are in the Faculty of Maths and Physics, so starting from where we are, and then implement this at a larger scale.
Yes, so the key takeaways from our presentation are, and sort of keeping in theme with everyone else, is education, collaboration, and youth voices. Through education, we want to increase awareness, interest, and the ability to act on the social and ethical impacts of new and existing technologies. Through collaboration, we want to endorse interdisciplinary research between the social and physical sciences to help technological innovation combat climate change through a systemic approach. And then young voices. So obviously, we're the ones who are going to have to deal with a lot of the sort of the brunt of the issues now, and we would like, a part to play in that. We'd like to have a say on how people are going to go about solving these issues. So, thank you for listening. Oh, lots of references. Yeah.
Thank you, Zahra, for your enlightening presentation. And Ella and Miriam, we greatly appreciate your participation as youth voices, as crucial to be amplified. So now I have some questions for you to provide your perspective. While we understand that you may not be experts, it is essential to listen to your insights, especially considering your future at stakes. So let's listen to a panel of youth here. And my first question will be, what are the biggest challenges facing your generation?
There's quite a lot. I think the biggest challenge is, personally for my understanding, is just getting everyone to be on the same page. There's a lot of dialogues that are making somewhat sense at a larger scale, but people not communicating with one another. And I think for us, a big challenge is to actually get a say that's listened to. So I found myself being not as listened as much or regarded as important when it comes to these things. So I feel like communication is one of the biggest challenges. So yeah, that's my take on this.
Yeah, I would say that climate change is definitely the biggest challenge that our generation will face. I mean, you've touched on it already, but the destabilizing of our ecosystem and our planet is terrifying and to think about, but also how it's going to exaggerate the existing inequalities around the world. And I think the second thing I think of when I think of the biggest challenges is probably the growth of polarization, which is really going to upset the way in which we can address these challenges as well. And we're already seeing this with climate change. If you look at what's happening in the UK, for example, our Prime Minister is using climate change to divide people, to set people who can't afford to respond to the climate crisis against those who want to do so urgently, despite the fact that we can do both. We can respond to it and bring everyone along at the same time. And I think also, polarization is an issue that touches on gender massively as well, because we're seeing massive polarized debates and culture wars being started within discussions around gender and transgender people. Again, getting people really riled up about something that we can address if we all sit down, sensibly and think about how we can create inclusive policies. And it is worrying because I think the way that the climate crisis is going to get progressively worse, and we're going to really need to come together, not only within countries, but also internationally to address these problems. For example, we're going to see maybe 1 billion people on the move, climate migrants, over the next couple decades, and how are we going to address that? And it can't be in the same way that we think about migration and immigration now, which again is through polarization and culture wars, because it's not sustainable. So, yeah, I worry deeply about that. And I think we need to think really about good tools that we can use and implement to address polarization. Partly is through education. I think interdisciplinary studies will be a massive part of that, so it's so great to hear about this work. Also things like citizens' assemblies, to get people with different views to sit down together and realize that we can come together to work on solutions. And that will feed into climate change. Those two problems and two concerns are deeply, deeply interlinked, but we can respond to both at the same time, actually, and I think that's a great opportunity to feed it back into the theme of the panel.
Thank you. Did you want to add something?
Yeah, I agree with the two of you that communication and the climate crisis are huge challenges that we face. But I would say we live in a poly-crisis. Like, I'm unable to pick only one, but I truly think they're all interconnected. And so I would say that the biggest challenge we have is addressing all of them with a systemic approach, understanding that we cannot fight the climate crisis if we don't change the way that we communicate and the narrative that we want to tell ourselves and future generations. So basically answering, I'll tell you, I'm not capable to answer to your question, but I would say, yeah, we just have to tackle all of them with the same goal in mind, I guess, which is systems change.
Thank you very much. My next question would be, integrating gender issues into climate action is obviously critical, as you've mentioned. But why is that? And do we need to talk about it differently to make sure that people can appreciate why it is important?
I think initially, sort of the fact that we have to split it up into thinking about how how climate is, it affects genders differently, is in it, in itself sort of tells you what the issue is. We're all experiencing it. We should be sort of considering the fact that everybody in our society is, we're all going to have to deal with the problem. So why would you disregard a group of people from that? I don't know. It's hard to sort of explain why it's critical. Obviously, it's critical. Everyone, we're all people. Yeah, sorry.
Yeah, kind of add on to that. Like, over half of the world population is women. So, like, why go around an issue neglecting half of the people? Like, if you had an issue in a classroom, you will make sure that everyone is, like, the issue is addressed for everyone. You wouldn't just leave half of your class without a solution just for the sake of it. So it's a very simple answer, because they are part of the people being affected. So why neglect that? You wouldn't neglect a patient in the hospital, so why neglect women and climate change? So.
Thank you very much. Do you want to add?
I mean, I would just repeat what they've said.
That's fine. I just want to make sure that everything you want to say, you can express. Yeah? What is the most realistic goal in regards to climate change, in your opinion?
I think the framing of that question is already quite daunting, because I think it kind of sets off that, I don't know, that some of the ways that we're thinking about the climate crisis are unrealistic, which I think is sort of automatically, putting the way that we're going to address this issue into a box, when really I think the way that we're really going to address the climate crisis, which, we can trace back to, our patterns of consumption, which we can trace back to extractivism, which comes back to capitalism, which means that really to address this issue and not just put patchwork solutions on it, means that we need to actually completely shift our paradigms of understanding in terms of our relations to each other, our relations to the planet. It requires such big thinking, and it's, we have to sort of almost dare to be unrealistic in what we can achieve when we're addressing climate change. I mean, even addressing, trying to keep temperature under 1.5 and all the solutions that are kind of within our grasp that we can use to achieve that is already, daunting enough and seems unrealistic enough already, and we have to dare to achieve that. But I do think, as I say, we have to almost go bigger and really sort of delve into why we allowed ourselves to get to this situation in the first place, and what other ways of being are possible, what other forms of society and ways of existing are possible too, and what better time to examine that than when we're on the verge of planetary destabilization, destruction. So if anything's going to make us do that, it's this situation now. So.
Yeah, I think it's really hard to think what's realistic and what's not. We know what we want. I mean, I know that I want a fossil fuels phase out, but that's not what they're discussing inside those negotiation rooms. So is that really, is that realistic or not? We know we want to keep to 1.5, but we have some scientists that say we're like 1.5 is on its deathbed already, and we're past 2 in the current trajectories as well. So I think the question is more on like you said, what do we want to achieve and what do we want to change? And I mean, I think we should be bold, because others will tell us that, oh, this is not feasible, this is not realistic. But if we don't push for what we want, then we will just retract to the mindset that has brought us to this state.
Thank you. Did you want to add anything? No? Okay. Another question. Do you think that technology is the solution for climate action? And what does techno-solutionism actually mean?
I have no idea what techno-solutionism means. I mean, I think technology obviously plays a part in the solution, but as we tried to highlight with our presentation, it can't be sort of the solution in isolation. It needs we need a collaboration between the sort of the technical side and the sort of the social and ethical side of what we're trying to, the solutions that we're going to try and implement. So, I mean, I think it certainly can help, but it can't help if you just consider it on its own.
Yeah, kind of add on to that. I feel like techno-solutionism is just like, as she said, it can't be taken into isolation. You can't just look at the technology. And as Remy was talking about before and Zahra was mentioning, the technology is already there. So if it's not working, surely there's an issue with it. Like, it's there. We've got the technology. We've got a lot of it. It's just how we use it, the scale we use it. And I think someone mentioned, like, now we're just taking little baby steps. We need to, if we want to use technology to help this crisis, we need to be a bit quicker and be more efficient with it and not look at it from like isolation. But I also think that a lot of the time when we look at technology, it's not as a way to solve the issue. It's just making sure that we kind of can do things just slower, just to drag it out a bit, to kind of like, allow things, the worst to happen later on. So kind of like pushing back that finish line, if that makes sense.
For me, techno-solutionism scares me deeply. And that's because it really has this place in my mind that techno-solutionism seems to be following the same line of thinking that we can, control and dominate nature, and, human made-up solutions will get us out of this crisis. But really, we got into this crisis by treating the Earth as a object that we could just take as much as we want from, with disregard for the consequences. And you really see it actually in terms of some of the solutions that, like, these that you see coming out of this line of thinking are really, really quite scary. So some, and are seriously being talked about now in terms of, filling the atmosphere with certain gases which bounce off more rays of the sun, or putting black balls over the Arctic ice to bounce off more of the sun's rays coming towards them. I mean, it's really freaky, dystopian stuff. And also, it's really pushing us further and further down this line. One, because I think it will make people and mass emitters think that they can continue along their current path and that tech will enable them to continue business as usual. But also, in line with the fact that it's the same line of thinking that led to the climate crisis, it also accelerates it. Because if you take the solution of pumping, I think it's sulfur dioxide is the gas, that you would pump into the atmosphere to protect us from the sun's rays. One, I mean, it's just insane pumping sulfur dioxide into the atmosphere. That's already toxic to us. But also it creates this heat trap problem where if for any reason we cannot keep doing that in the future, the consequences, if we were to suddenly lose that gas in the atmosphere because it would dissipate and escape into space, means that we would suddenly very rapidly experience the consequences of the climate crisis, of the gases already in our atmosphere, because the planet, if we were to stop being able to keep pumping this gas, our planet would very, very, very rapidly heat up, and we would experience maybe decades of global warming within, a couple years, which is terrifying again to think about. So yeah, techno-solutionism scares me. I think it's the wrong thing to prioritize. But obviously, in our modern way of life, we're not going to completely get away from technology now. Technology is going to be part of the solution, which I think means that we need to really think about what are the safeguards that we're going to put on technology to make sure that we're using it appropriately. So that's things like making sure that the technology is public or community owned, so that people have a say in how the technology is designed and how it's implemented. It's also about making sure that it's brought about through proper consultations with marginalized groups, especially women, for example, who need to play a role in designing and producing those technologies that are going to be used by them and will affect them, but also other groups like indigenous peoples as well. They are the people closest to the land, and they are already raising alarms about some of these solutions that are being brought about and how it will primarily affect them because they're custodians of massive amounts of the landmass of our planet, but also because they see how those solutions will affect natural systems that are in play that maybe a lot of us are ignorant to. So yeah, techno-solutionism, I think it's something we're going to have to deal with, unfortunately, but we really have to be very, 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 very careful about how we go about doing so.
Thank you very much. Do you have one word, because we need to move on?
Yeah, I'd say I think it's far from being the solution. I think we really need to change mindsets, because it will be humans who are using the technologies. And again, if we're using those technologies with the same mindset, we'll just be trapped in the same cycle. But like you said, they can be part of the solution. But then we have to change the rules of the game of how we want to use them and what for, and who decides.
Thank you very much. Thank you for this great insight. So to conclude our discussion, we will now turn to the final reflection from Zahra and Remy. What are the 3 takeaways that individuals can carry with them as they leave the room? What actionable steps can they take at their respective level? And then we'll give the floor to questions. 5 minutes, please.
Okay. Thank you, Nathalie. Thank you, youth, although I might still be a youth. Okay, so I just want to say that today we always use this word sustainable, and we use it a lot in research grants, and we use it a lot to make ourselves feel better almost. And it's becoming a word that is just sort of like buttered up almost. But we need to actually realize what does sustainable mean and how we actually utilize these words that I was talking about earlier. We know through the GRIP network that education is important, and that's one of the things Ella and Miriam said will be amazing. It's just having the education. So number 1 key takeaway is education. Having the youth participate in conversations going back to what Charlie was saying as well, we don't need technology all the time. Indigenous people know their land, so we can learn not only through higher education, we can learn through knowledge exchange. That leads me to number 2, which is collaboration. Bridging the gap between the different disciplines will allow for proper sustainable solutions from start to finish. How can we look at the critical materials, the elements that we use, that will actually benefit society as a whole and not just a group of people? And finally, I would say gender mainstreaming. So, you know, it's not just women, it's not just men, it's all of society. How can we make sure that we address the fact that these things are actually happening and that, you know, this will widen inequality? So mainstreaming gender into every single thing that we talk about, not just having a gender day at the COP, but making sure gender is implemented in every single day that we talk about. So I just want to point out that today, Kenya's minister did mention gender in the discussion about urbanization and climate change, you know, and that was one minister who mentioned gender. So we need to make sure that we don't just dedicate a day to gender, but that gender is at the forefront of everything that we do. And as people, as young people, looking at everything from physical science to social science to anything through a gender lens will just allow us to have more practical, sustainable solutions. So those are my takeaways. And I just want to highlight that at GRIP, we also have resources available. So for example, just going to highlight our reference guide. But no, these are just available to anyone who might not really know or understand why we need gender analysis. And so we have resources available. And these are just reference guides to help people in the field and out of the field just have a better idea. So even if people are interested and they want something, resources are out there available. So you just have to connect with the right people, and that will allow you to find better solutions. Thank you.
I don't know if I'll respond to your question as you posed it. I would rather, you know, perhaps be able to reflect on some of the points made by the other people on this panel. A couple of things come to mind when we spoke about the notion of polarization and what impact that is having. And of course, that's creating sort of tribalism ultimately. And how do we overcome those notions of tribalism? And how do you find a unifying message? And it's extraordinarily complex, of course, because we all have different wants and needs. And it's trying to find that in a way that is, I mean, I've often talked about it here through the sort of economic perspective, but how do you improve people's quality of life, and how do you make sure that you link those activities together? I don't have the answer, but it's just that notion of recognizing what the issue is, I think, and tribalism is that issue, and then finding ways that you can tie it together. That's kind of what you were saying made me think of. One other thing we didn't talk about really at all is the power dynamics here. I mean, we see it at the COP, and we see it everywhere, and the fact that we're seeking, to the best of our ability, to give a platform to a youth voice here is great, but it's obviously not enough, right? I mean, there's my perspective on often these UN conferences and many other conferences, not just UN, but the youth vote has this notion of tokenism associated with it. They're brought out. We've heard the youth for 15 minutes, and now we move on to business as usual. And that really makes me beg the question is, what are the levers of power that we really want to impact that could change that? And you think about, these are much bigger issues, of course, but you think about within our own countries, perhaps. How, is it a case of reducing the voting age to 16 to recognize that people who are able to think more about what they want in the future before they necessarily have all the responsibilities that get in the way of making the kinds of choices they may hope to have made in the past? Is it our entire voting systems are designed in such a way that they don't allow the power dynamics to shift? Should we, be having much more representative voting mechanisms? Charlie, you spoke about citizens' assemblies. We've seen, I think the one that happened in Ireland with regard to the issue of abortion was a kind of a landmark case where the issue hasn't moved for decades in the country, and then you ask some people, and they actually like, that's okay, we've moved beyond it, and it wouldn't have happened with a traditional electoral referendum, for example, perhaps. And I think just the issue of techno-solutionism, lastly, and more so, what does techno-solution represent? Because what are we trying to have? We're trying to, all of us trying to have a good quality of life. ideally maintain our quality of life. And if we could find a simple way to make that happen, wouldn't it be great? And that kind of lends itself to a kind of silver bullet mentality that has informed most of our decision making over decades and centuries, perhaps. We know that the ecological transition is not a silver bullet. There are dozens or hundreds of answers to the question, and that is a massive mindset shift that we need to is the word inculcate, integrate into our mindset. Because if we think in the same ways that we always have, we'll always get the same results we've had in the past. And I think that's what form that takes. I don't necessarily know, but we really need to sort of press reset on that.
Thank you very much, Zahra. Thank you very much, Remy. The floor is open now for question, and yes.
Hi, my name is Ratna. I'm from Technical University, Darmstadt. It was really a nice talk. Like, gender is a new topic for me. I haven't known much about it, so it was really enlightening to me to learn about it. But I do have a question on solar geoengineering. When you're talking about how do we have to bring more people, communities into decision making. But I do also see engineers are the huge responsibility in this case, because somewhere bringing new technologies is seen as something great, amongst the engineers, and so educating them during the college about what are the implications of each technology or something is highly lacking, I feel. Because I come from science background and then I moved to social sciences recently, and I see that there is a huge gap between that understanding in both the spaces. And when you were talking about solar geoengineering especially, have you thought about this one, or do you have any comments on this?
I mean, as you said, there is a massive gap between the physical and the bringing the new innovation, whatever it is, it's oh my gosh, that's so cool. But then forgetting that, the implication, and that's why in our project we're okay, let's think about sustainability before we even start thinking about the solution, so that we already get that, in the process of developing it. And obviously, technology is a very, very complicated issue. Myself, I don't come from a STEM background. I do social sciences. So it's kind of hard to see, again, that big gap that you talked about. So yeah, I think that's my opinion, that there's more that needs to be done to kind of bridge that gap, and to bridge it as soon as possible. It's so good if you bridge it after your fifth PhD, but no, let's start from as soon as you leave, as soon as you enter higher education, if that makes sense. So yeah.
Just to add also, I'm a physical scientist and I moved into the social sciences. So what I would say is there is always this silo, there's always this separation and this sort of isolation between them. And I think before you get into any research, if you actually approach it with a holistic approach and say, okay, this is the research, this is what I'm going to do, and have an actual method, and then sit with maybe someone from a different faculty or discipline, and they could bring up these questions and be oh, actually, did you know that has this gender aspect, or this is this? So for example, in chemistry, we do a lot of research in electric, lithium-ion batteries and stuff like that. And, it's amazing. Anyone who wants to do this research, good on you. But if you sat down with them and said, actually, do you know where this material is actually coming from? Do you know that Indigenous women are losing their livelihoods? So if someone just sits down and has a look, and then if you partner up with people from these communities, you could have this open dialogue, and therefore, you'd be okay, you know what, this is not probably... It doesn't mean that the solution is not there. I mean, electric vehicles are probably the future, but we need to make sure that the whole, from start to end, is a circular economy, like we say. We need to make sure that we analysing things in a way that's going to be sustainable for everyone. So looking at how are we not exploiting resources from the global south to make the global north make themselves feel better about themselves, you know? So I think, yeah, just making sure when you do a research or proposal, making sure that maybe as a research proposal, you are asked these questions. So from the get-go, you're already thinking about these things. And that might be one way of bridging that gap. Thank you.
Thank you. We've got one more question, and I think we're going to need to wrap up.
Hello, my name is Fortunata Manyeresa from United Republic of Tanzania. Thank you so much for the good presentation from the panelists. And back in Tanzania, we are also working with the women groups in regard to income generating activities. And due to the increase of climate change effects, we are trying to reduce the effect of climate change by tackling the poverty within the among the women groups. So, for instance, instead of them cutting trees to make charcoal and have the income, we train them in making like these homemade batiks. These are homemade batiks where we train them so that instead of selling charcoal, instead of selling firewood, now we are having them to make this homemade. This is not from the factory. This is just a homemade batik so that at least they earn income. But also we do the inclusion for the people with a disability. For instance, we are also working with our people with a disability. So I would like also to know your experience. How do you include them in your programs? Because we know that women are not a homogenic group. There are those with a disability. And again, the disability is different. There are those who are blind, there are those who cannot speak and cannot talk. For instance, in our country, we are having challenges for those who cannot see. How do we have materials with brailles? So we don't have those kind of materials. But also, we are facing challenges, for instance, when we want to communicate with those who are deaf and cannot speak, cannot hear properly. Sometimes we lack people who have got skills to make the interpretation so that they follow up, for instance, during the training. And they miss some knowledge because we are not able to facilitate them to their fullest. I would like to know more about the inclusion as this leave no one behind and not for us, without us. After saying that, thank you so much.
Thank you very much for your question. I'll just quickly add, I'll let the others talk. But what you said is really, really important. So when we talk about intersectionality, we know that women, especially women who are disabled, are at such disadvantage in a lot of aspects, and we often group disability as homogenous as well, but there's physical disabilities, there's mental disabilities, and all disabilities have special and specific needs. I think the biggest thing is coming from, like I say, education and making sure that we know how to handle these and training people so they are aware of how to do this. It could be something as simple as making sure that sign language is taught at all schools, because as you say, we often, we will say, okay, it's a quota, we've got gender, we've got this, and disability is often overlooked. From my experience, even at UCL, even if you have mobility issues, it is so difficult to get around. And there will be people who sort of champion themselves and saying, we're diverse, we're inclusive, and they often forget about disabled people. So I think really having them in the discussion and promoting their voices and advocating for them is the first step, but also having relevant training and having this intersectional approach and mindset from a young age. So, even from primary school, if kids now learn that disability is not just this hyper-marginalized community, that they are actors for change and they are resilient and we can learn from them. And so I think from a young age, having them in the conversation is going to allow us to have actually effective, inclusive policies. So that's just my two words. Anyone else?
Yeah, I think I'd only add that we're only able to meet the needs if we ask the people what their needs are, because sometimes we just imagine youth might need this specific training, but maybe they don't. Maybe they need mentoring. we don't know, right? So I would say this is something that people usually forget to do, just asking. Simple like that, right? But not that simple because people don't do it every time, so yeah.
Yeah, just adding on to that, yeah. So usually if, for example, they might ask you, oh, do you have accessibility needs? And then you might write yes, and they'll be like, uh-oh, we don't actually have anything to cater for that. So it's not only just ticking the box and saying, ask the question, it's how can you make your infrastructure more accessible to everyone? And that's digital and physical infrastructure, yeah.
And if I could just add on the end of that as well, to talk a little bit, to bring in, well, the organisation that I'm here with at COP is the Climate Youth Negotiator programme, which is designed to train young people and bring them to COP to be able to take part in the UNFCCC negotiations themselves. And it's interesting, you know, listening to this discussion, because I completely agree with the points both made, but as well as asking people what they need, our focus is on empowering them to design the frameworks themselves. So if you look at, for example, the island states that are here at COP, very often they will rely on people not from their own island to negotiate on their behalf, because they're experts in the UK, the US, or elsewhere, that they rely on that expertise. But actually, it's really fundamental and important to be able to, you know, engage in that capacity building and give the people from, you know, the places being affected by the climate crisis, the skills, the knowledge, the access, to be able to go and design frameworks that they need implemented around the world. They know the effects of the climate crisis that they're experiencing, so they should be, you know, around the table participating meaningfully in creating those new systems. So that's what we're trying to do in terms of the process side of it as well. And, you know, it's both sides are very, very important, of course.
Thank you very much. These questions were great. And as we draw this panel to a close, let's reflect on the insightful discussions that we had today. I would like to express my sincere appreciation to our esteemed panelists, Yvette, Ramos, who is virtually through video, Remy, Kalter, Dr. Zahra Khan, Ella Bedford, Miriam, Zallocco, Clara Boto, and Charlie Bevis for sharing their expertise. Your contribution have been invaluable. I also want to thank our audience. We couldn't take all the questions, but the ones that we took were really great and I want to thank you for your active participation and engaging questions. Your presence has truly enriched the dialogue. So as we conclude, please stay tuned for our upcoming events, opportunity, and the pledge, all of which can be accessed on WOMENVAI website, which is womenvai.org. You can also find the pledge by scanning the QR code displayed on the screen, which will lead you to a WhatsApp group to sustain this crucial conversation. And the second QR code is provided for those interested in becoming a member of WOMENVAI. Once again, thank you very much to everyone involved in making this panel a success. Have a wonderful evening. Thank you.
Remark, which yes. We are over the time, but I just wanted to ask everyone who are involved in what we are doing here, also with guests, to have a common picture on the stage. Panelists will be sitting, and whoever wish to have the picture together with WOMENVAI would stand behind, okay? Ella, can we still, you see it, we have a picture with you, okay? And at the very end from WOMENVAI, I would like to express that I'm very proud of our students.